All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Really excited to be here today on the 223rd Governance and Risk Call here at MakerDAO. Looks like today is, you can grab the date, January 26th, 2023. Joining you for another weekly call here at Maker, where we go over all things governance and risk. Whether you're a longtime contributor, first time joiner, or you're just checking us out on the recording, welcome. Really great to have you be with us and come build part of our community. So before we get into the call, we do have a few ground rules. This is just some stuff that will make it a little bit easier for us to participate, have some good discussions today, and cover a lot of ground. First and foremost, let's avoid talking over one another. I know that can be hard on Zoom calls, but if you noticed you're talking over someone, just pause for a moment. We'll get it sorted out. There are a few things you can do that will help me out on that regard. Feel free to use the raised hand feature under reactions in Zoom. If you'd like to join our kind of virtual speaking list, that lets me know you'd love to add a comment in when the current speaker is done talking. If you're unable or unwilling to use the mic, you can always drop your question or comment in chat, and I'm happy to work it in when conversationally appropriate. Yeah, that'll help us communicate a little better. In that vein, right? Like if you have a camera and you're comfortable turning it on, we always love to see who's joining us today. It's really great to see the people that are participating and help making decentralized governance happen. Cool. This is, like I said, an open call, so we really do want to get your voice, your opinion, any clarifying questions on the record, help everyone learn a little more. The only last rule is if you do hop on the mic, take a moment to introduce yourself, let people know who you are and where you're speaking from. And that'll just make things a little easier, both for those here in the call and for the recording. All right, we try not to be too rules heavy, so hopefully we haven't lost you. We do have a bit of an agenda to get through today. As usual, we'll be starting going over the votes and what's happening in the land of maker improvement proposals. We do not have an initiative update today. Look for one next week on some real-world assets potential lending ventures. So instead, after our updates, we're going to dive right into the discussion, start talking about DAO level objectives. That should give us plenty of time to get some back and forth to really talk about some of the pain points we're feeling in regards to funding and the transition to in-game, and maybe get some recommendations for the SMIP. So hoping we can have a really good call. Looking forward to seeing what we come up with. And yeah, just a reminder, if there's anything else you want to talk about or you have a question, just throw it in the chat. We'll get to it, and it'll make us have a better call for having it. Cool. I will quickly run through the votes for us, and then I will stop talking for at least a little bit. We had two weekly polls from this past week. One was for offboarding some of the legacy stablecoin vaults. Those parameters did pass, so you'll be seeing communications on offboarding going up now to a little after this call if you haven't already. And we can offboard those 14 days after those communications go off. So do be looking for those offboardings in an upcoming executive. Likewise, we had a poll with a couple different options for adjusting the dust limit, or the debt floor, as it's colloquially called. The limited reduction, option one. So we will be seeing some smaller debt floor reductions to various vaults. And again, you can expect that probably in about 2 weeks. You'll be hearing a whole bunch of updates from our MIP editor on the 15 ratification polls that close on Monday, but I won't steal the or bury the lead there. For the executives, you might have noticed we didn't have an executive last week, and we have yet to have an executive this week. We should be getting one shortly. We're expecting to put one up tomorrow. And it will have all those things listed there, from parameter changes to MKR vesting, housekeeping for the Aave D3M and FlashMint module, as well as lowering the GUSD fee out. So like I said, keep an eye out for that. We're hoping to post that tomorrow. And then we will keep you posted as to the following week. All right, that is more than enough on my end. I'm very happy to be handing over the mic to one of our MIP editors, Gala, who's going to walk you through what's happening in the land of maker improvement proposals.
Yes, thanks, Peyton. So I'm here to give you the MIPS update. The 15 ratification polls for the January governance cycle closed on Monday. Let's take a look at the results. For our top level MIPS, MIP 92 was approved. It will onboard a maximum of 100 million of PSM USDC into a bespoke non-custodial ERN vault. For our amendments and removals, the protocol DAI transfer cumulative ceiling of 250,000 DAI has been removed. Then the two changes to the recognized delegate participation metrics were approved. So this is setting a minimum threshold of non-abstaining votes for compensation eligibility and increasing the participation requirements in the case of executive votes. The amendments to MIP 63 were approved as well. The way payments are being sent was defined and the buffers reported. Stream durations were made explicit. So we used to have an implicit 6-month duration. And now it is possible for the sequencer to set custom windows per network. Following up on the amendments on removals, MIP 23 and MIP 28, which were both related to the deprecated domain framework, have been marked as obsolete since the sub-proposal was approved. Next, the sub-proposal to repeal MIP 14, which is the protocol DAI transfer, and the sub-proposal to remove calendar exceptions on MIP 51 were both rejected. As for our core unit framework, the GovComs core unit has been offboarded. The MKR retroactive compensation multiplier that was chosen by governance was 80%. For the funding requests, a special purpose fund for 209,000 DAI to support a strategic finance expanded mandate that is related to real world assets was approved. The special purpose fund requesting 5 million DAI for establishing a defense fund was approved. This will have the purpose of reimbursing legal defense expenses incurred by active participants of MakerDAO in cases they are the target of legal or regulatory actions. The author of this sub-proposal just mentioned on the thread that the proposal will be put on hold until the implementation details are clarified. So please take a look at the discussion. I'm gonna put the link here in the chat if you want more details about this. And the special purpose fund for 100,000 DAI, which aimed to develop a proof of performance for Viridian cluster, was rejected. A MIP 14C2 request for 138,894 DAI for funding tech ops during the month of February was passed. And likewise, MIP 14C2 request, it was for 43,560 DAI for funding Immunified Security Core Unit from December 2022 until May 2023 was also passed. Finally, Chainlink has been onboarded as a keeper network, and a declaration of intent to develop a comprehensive on-chain monitoring solution for real-world assets vaults has been ratified and is now active. So this was all for our ratification polls. Now let's take a look at the proposals in RFC. As you may know, we have many of them. Most of them are eligible to the February governance cycle. As we summarized in our previous GNR call, we have proposals to onboard real-world asset vaults, introduce a defender contract against governance attacks, start utilizing the HATS protocol, introduce new frameworks to broadcast and manage requests for projects and associated funding, which Pros just mentioned will be part of our discussion today. And very recently, MIP 99 to offer DAI to CeFi to enable real-world use cases. As mentioned on the previous GNR call as well, MIP 94 is going to transition into a declaration of intent. It will inherit its accumulated feedback period as the content will remain the same. For the amendments and removals, we have an amendment proposal that modifies MIP 41 to expedite some of its processes and increase its flexibility. And we also have an amendment to MIP 62, which is the collateral offboarding process that allows changing the communication responsibilities. As for the core unit framework proposals, we have a core unit offboarding for CES, a budget request by Tech Ops, and a facilitator onboarding proposal for NIC 0 to lead CES. Finally, we have proposals to restart the MKR burning and a MIP 14 request to fund the development of an informational endgame portal. This will enter the weekly cycle next Monday, the 30th, as a short ratification poll that will last for 3 days. For our important dates, please remember that February 1st, next Wednesday, end of day, is the last day to introduce modifications to eligible proposals for the February governance cycle. So that's it for the MIPS update. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Gala. Obviously, a ton of stuff going on in MIPS land. We just ended a big vote on a bunch of those proposals, but there's still plenty more that are waiting to be heard. So as a reminder, let's keep those conversations going in the forum. There's also the written weekly MIPS update where you can get linked out to all the proposals Gala mentioned here today in the call. All right. Thanks again, Gala, for wonderful MIP editing. So as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we do not have a kind of informational segment today. So we're going to dive straight into discussion. And pretty excited. We had delayed this topic from last week, given the talk that we had on the Viridian cluster. So once again, I'll be welcoming back Retro to be talking this time about some stuff that you're proposing for changing the DAO in the transition period to endgame. Retro, I see your face there. Let's go ahead and hand the mic over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Peyton. As he mentioned, I'm the interim facilitator of CES and contributor at the Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling Core Unit. And today we're going to be talking about potentially a new funding mechanism that the DAO can take advantage of to address some of the shortcomings of the Core Unit framework and to better align and support the transition of the DAO to endgame ready state. If we could hop to the next slide, a quick TLDR touching on the high points for everybody. This again is just introducing the foundation or the preliminary MIPS for work-based or project-based funding that we presented on back in August, I think. There's no forced changes for any core units. It's just making more tools available both for governance and core units if they would elect to use those operational improvements. And then again, this is ideally the foundation for laying potentially a framework or other tools that these MIPS can evolve into alongside and into endgame. If we jump to the next slide then, I think it's fair to note that 3 MIPS were introduced in total during the last RFC cycle. To touch briefly on MIP 96, which isn't the focus of this call, that MIP is intended to formalize the auditor framework that SES has been developing and operating. The intent behind that is in response to the CES interim situation to, again, just give governance a tool and have some confidence around if something is audited within the DAO, that term carries some weight. But the majority of today's conversation, which we're looking for feedback on before the RFC deadline, before February 1st, is the 2 MIPS, the DLO framework and the work proposal. And the best way to introduce everyone to these concepts is the MIP 97 DLO a DAO level objective proposal is it's intended to introduce a tool that defines work and deliverables separate from the workforce. So one concept could be developing endgame products. Those are DAO initiatives that may not fit wholly within a mandate or may not be currently funded underneath a mandate. This then gives the tool to develop something similar to like a functional specification document or like a project request that the MIP 98 work proposal would then respond and answer to, enabling that funding or the expansion of a team or direct delivery of value based on the work that's defined. So jumping to the next slide, just to recap some of the goals and to formally introduce these concepts. One more slide, please. Calling back again to that August post that got some good buzz regarding project-based funding. This evolution, again, is just working on separating the work from the workforce. It's clarifying the expectations for funding and the value that the funding delivers through the workforce. This is intended to be more of like a platform type tool for the DAO to use and iterate and improve, expecting more amendments and improvements to happen, similar to a framework, but the initial implementation is mainly focusing on taking what we currently have in use in MIP 14, 40, and 55, and then restructuring that in a more flexible MIP setup to encourage the evolution. And then again, it's an area that could be iterated on, whether it's in DVCs or in some other group that forms to manage this organizational change. So if we hop over to the next slide, we'll start diving into DLOs a little bit. DLO, again, is this concept of defining a project or work. It requires explicit outcomes versus implicit or something related to a mandate that isn't necessarily as concrete as, say, a business plan or a project plan. And again, it's this dynamic framework that can support your routine operations, your opportunities for innovation, time-sensitive operations as well. That's been a tricky part to try to develop that we'll touch on a little bit later in the prepared material. But then also talk about the concept of skill-based operations where the DAO potentially needs these experts to come in to support framework development or some other complex operations. This now gives the DAO some tool to then request specific skills and expertise for specific work. And then again, the overall intent is to create more like signaling mechanisms, if you will. So we call this a way to introduce lightweight prioritization into the DAO based on how DLOs stack can have different expiry and different requirements for the timelines of each project, which again, we'll get into a little bit later with the example provided. Hopping to the next slide then to introduce everyone to work proposals. The screenshots provided on the last slide and this slide are just a fictitious example that we'll use at the end. So if you can't read it or want more details, not to worry. But what the work proposal is hopefully showing in accompanying with the DLO is that work is very explicit, is very structured. This isn't intended to be your narrative type post that really gets into a lot of the background of a subject, but more focus on we're looking to spend money, we're looking to create this sort of value, we're looking to enable this sort of project or work or feature, or again, routine maintenance. And then the work proposal then allows a workforce to be assigned to that work, again, separately from the work being defined, but then also start to compete a little bit on price and how maybe some of the black box operations work. So the work proposal is intended to, again, provide explicit transparency or not if there's a team that's trusted or there's a process that doesn't require heavy reporting, say something is more routine versus innovative and explorative, like some of the real world asset work that's been going on. The reporting requirements tied to milestones and deliveries can be more passive versus more engaging. And that, again, can be done on a case-by-case basis underneath the current frameworks that are being proposed. And then lastly, again, this resets the DAO's and governance's relationship to the work and not necessarily to bespoke individuals or contributors or teams. Hopping over to the next slide then, we'll start to merge the two concepts together. So on the left-hand side is a light description of the process of getting a DLO suggested and approved. And then on the right-hand side, it's focused on the work proposal that follows. First, a DLO is proposed. The example that we'll detail on later in the slide is the concept of enabling funding and direction for core units to form ecosystem actors. That could be defined as a single DLO, which has multiple deliverables that any core unit or team that submits a work proposal against to receive funding would be expected to perform. So immediately that starts to provide more explicit direction towards the workforce, clear expectations. I would also assume better alignment of how funds are going to be used to accomplish those objectives. And then I think it also, again, highlights the correct transparency desired by the DAO, which is saying maybe we don't care about how compensation and recruitment fees are done. Ultimately, in end game, that stuff is going to be pushed to the fringe. But even in this current state, the reporting requirements that are seen associated to the MIP 40 are pretty robust. But maybe they need to be tweaked a little bit for each individual project, or maybe they need to be made more consistent from core unit to core unit. This, again, is the opportunity to do that. So using the DLO of enabling core units to transition into ecosystem actors, the DLO is discussed as the overall objective that the DAO is trying to promote. From there, once the overall objective is agreed upon and voted and accepted, it clearly defines the path forward of, if you receive funding, this is the work that's expected to come from that. Any other important expectations, as well as flexibility within the specific objective, can also be listed. One example of this could say this DLO has a close scope of milestones, like we only want these 4 delivered, but then an alternative DLO could encourage additional milestones to be proposed, or potentially even detail out like the intent of using either available funding or continuing the project with another DLO in the future. But once all that's agreed upon and voted through, the DLO is then considered active, and opportunities to contribute or work on it then are now open. So this is where the work proposal concept comes in. Once a DLO is active, a work proposal then can be submitted against it. We expect to see multiple proposals from multiple teams being requested against a DLO. So another attribute of a DLO is that it can also define that this funding is only available for one team and make it more of your typical like RFP process where the work is awarded to an individual team, or it could be more exploratory and open. Again, going back to the core unit ecosystem actor enablement concept, the DLO could define that this is available to all core units, so 17 teams, or it could restrict it to try to create some urgency to say like the first 10 are guaranteed funding. Again, it's just focusing on that platform concept and the flexibility to not make every project into a lengthy contract negotiation and something typical of the traditional world, but at least start giving the tools to governance to then right size those opportunities. So to quickly run through the right side then, the work proposal is submitted. The team's ability to deliver is explored separately from the DAO's work that's being defined. This would be the appropriate time to look at a team if that's applicable for this specific DLO. Funding, reporting, and cadence expectations are then defined within the DLO for the specific objective, and then the work proposal is accepted and the work basically begins. See some messages in chat. So Frank asks, are there any guidelines for sub-DAOs in order to identify the important characteristics of a work proposal, and how are objectives chosen? So any guidelines for sub-DAOs to identify the important characteristics. The expectation here is that would be a specific section within the work proposal that says this is going to be our approach overall to delivering the project. Some teams may prefer to be more black box, and maybe they have their reputation that can carry it, and the DAO's comfortable with that. That would be an opportunity to play with the concept of trust a little bit, which I'm not super in support of. But yes, I would anticipate a DLO basically saying, like, yeah, we're looking for some input on this. There could be a DLO to draft a DLO, which I think is getting a little repetitious, and governance should have the tools available to do some of that preliminary research on the front end. But I would see the situation where an overall objective is approved by a work proposal's preliminary submission of how the work is going to get done, by unearthing some of those competitive advantages that a team would bring. I think that does touch on another important point where we don't want to get too what's the word I'm looking for, like too open, where people's like trade secrets are being exposed. But it's similar to that sales process then, where it's saying, you know, we're going to follow these steps. This is how our team operates. This is what we're comfortable sharing. And if there does need to be nitty gritty discussions, the opportunity for that to happen is on the front end, ideally then improving whatever team's ability to deliver by having that discussion. And then El Progreso also asks, how are objectives chosen? That right now is basically something similar to like, say, a MIT 40 process. Like multiple MIT 40s can go up in a cycle. How we choose funding for those is governance discussions, and kind of lives in the black box of how that happens right now. There could be more mature mechanisms, to your point, trying to relate it to scope frameworks. I could envision a future where each scope framework has an article. And Article 2 is more about the routine maintenance functions that need to occur. Article 2 could have a permanent DLO that's associated with it to support the concept of spending 80% of the DAO's operational budget on primary scopes and 20% on support scopes. That's one opportunity to start layering that in. And then how the work is assigned to the workforce is then separate to how the DAO wants to fund and grow strategically. Happy to answer any follow-up questions there, Frank, if that isn't clear.
No, it is. I mean, I was kind of trying to get an idea of how do you, kind of test, how do you get the validity of an objective? How is it tested? The validity of, so if a DLO is proposed, right? How does the sub-DAO kind of validate that the objective fits the scope framework of that sub-DAO? But maybe you don't have an answer right now for that, which is fine.
Yeah, like I said, the overall MIPS intended to be that platform that can evolve into more refined situations, like what you're describing with sub-DAOs and assigning budget. But for right now, it's really focused on providing another tool to core units to have a more mature funding mechanism and ways to expand outside of an SPF that could have more specific deliverables attached to it. And then from there, it's evolving the best practices or the configurations of the available parameters in a DLO to meet the needs of future scopes and frameworks.
Got it. Thanks, man.
There's no further questions. I'll touch briefly on governance and then walk through the example. But before we do that, it looks like Tadeo asks, do you see DLOs and work proposals working alongside declarations of intent or would replace it? May default to Peyton for a more academic answer, but I would see the opportunity for that to happen if that's the direction we're going. Again, it's designed to be this dynamic framework, but I don't realistically see that happening. I guess I see declarations of intent, evolving into those frameworks, and then that's what's getting the funding more closely tied to it at this point.
Yeah, like there's potentially an advantage to still being able to pass a declaration of intent that isn't a DAO level objective, right? Like maybe there's something that you as a DAO want to showcase that you intend to do without attaching like all these rigorous expectations and deliverables to it, right? So you could have a reason for both of those to coexist, but I think in a lot of ways, like this is kind of what people wished our declaration of intents were, which was like more explicit of like, hey, we're not just intending to do this. We're saying, hey, if a project comes along that fulfills X, Y, and Z, here's what we're going to do for it. Yeah. So I think they're slightly different potentially, but our angle towards the same thing.
Yeah, happy to make this more discussion based on any other questions that come across. Happy to pause. But while we're waiting for those, let's go ahead and jump ahead one slide. So fitting in with governance is still something that I need to tighten up before the deadline on Wednesday. The overall concept that I was trying to flesh out with this is how do we make something a little bit more dynamic than Emit 40, basically. How do we make it have these governance checkpoints, but then also not make it too bureaucratic, too much overhead for governance, allow to have some agility to respond to situations that do require some more project-based work. What was basically come up, proposed right now in the MIPS is DLOs are proposed and approved basically in a 1 month cycle. That would be several weeks in RFC, a week frozen, and then a week voting. Once the DLO is active, that again is basically saying we're open to accepting applications for handing out funding to accomplish this objective. That active phase is different than the delivery phase. So the example that we'll use with the core unit ecosystem actors is that the expiry window of the DLO is 3 months. So teams have to say in the next quarter they're going to be an ecosystem actor. And then the work delivered against that DLO is required in 6 months. So you have 3 months basically to apply. And then at the end of 3 months, anybody that has a work proposal accepted can then take up to 6 months to deliver it. So if somebody gets in the very first month of the DLO being active, they would ultimately deliver 7 months from that DLO being live. If somebody gets in month 3 right before the window closes, that would be 9 months out that the objective of the DLO is delivered. The strategy again with that is there may be more innovative or moonshot type work that the DAO wants to see done, but maybe the workforce isn't well suited for it. Maybe it's not a high priority. Maybe the environment doesn't require immediate action, but it's this golden opportunity that's always sitting out there. This, again, is just a tool to say, we want to fund this. We want somebody to work on this. This is a priority for us, so the direction we want to go. Work proposals then would have a similar month process in governments where once a DLO is active and the work proposal is submitted, it spends a couple of weeks in RFC, moves into frozen, then gets voted on, and then once it's active, then that the time expectation requirement of a DLO kicks in. So if we hop to the next page, then we can look at the DLO example that I worked up. Real quick though here, I would say that the DLO and the work proposal frameworks are a little bit separate than like the overall concept of a work-based budgeting framework. The original plan that we submitted, I think would benefit from having a similar concept of like a facilitator DAO or a budget allocator really taking a lot of this overhead over for the DAO, but I think that's too much complexity to try to master at this point. So introducing this tool to define work and a better mechanism for assigning funding, especially right now where we need to define a project that several teams can take advantage of and deliver against, being that ecosystem actor formation. That's the primary focus of the tool today. And then as we see volumes increase and potentially more desires to push more funding through this mechanism, we can support it with the appropriate workforce teams. The other thing to call out from the slide, though, is that strategy isn't necessarily in scope for what we're talking about here. It's more of that black box of governance, if you will. This is really a focus on addressing the black box of the workforce. And then again, our thinking is the frameworks and scopes and end game plan is really more focused on that wider DAO strategy that then governance can define work against and the workforce can deliver. Hop into the next slide. This is, again, just like a quick DLO proposal that I worked up. The concept here would be getting core units a pathway to become ecosystem actors. The DLO defines 4 deliverables, pretty lightly defined, but just some examples would be, writing a business plan, producing that as a PDF document, and then posting it to the forum. That's the end-to-end expectations of this deliverable. The quality and sections of it aren't necessarily defined. If the DAO wanted to see more detailed inconsistency in the business plan, this would be the opportunity to do that for all the ecosystem actors, or it could be defined at a little bit more higher level to see what sort of results we get, or allow a little bit more experimentation there. The second deliverable would be confirming the legal entity is set up. The third one would be enabling some branding and marketing and defining what that means a little bit better, like developing a logo and having a Twitter. There could also be optional components of a deliverable. So for example, in marketing, it's optional to submit 2 months of ad campaign data, a part of that DLO. The thinking there being, if you're requesting a marketing budget and you don't show that, then there's a way to highlight, this team isn't necessarily delivering against what's being asked of them, or it's just, again, creating those opportunities to learn both more about the work and the workforce to improve the overall structure. And then the last one would just be like signing up for emails and different infrastructure there. The DLO then defines the timeline for delivery of those deliverables as 3 months. Meaning that once a work proposal is accepted, the team has 3 months to deliver all 4 milestones. And then the suggested funding for this would be 50% of the requested budget upfront, as well as 50% streamed over the 3-month delivery period. And the opportunity to request a different funding methodology is explicitly defined as available here for a work proposal, to basically say, maybe the marketing team needs a little bit more upfront funding to get their ecosystem actor stood up, but a smaller team wouldn't need as much upfront and can stream it more. Just again, opportunities if we want to make it available or not. And then the lower part of the parameters talks about some of those other parameters that were discussed. So this DLO says that there's only 17 work proposals that could be accepted against this DLO for the 17 core units. It's also restricting the workforce team to be affiliated with the DAO currently as either a core unit contributor or mandated actor. The expiry of the DLO itself is 4 months. So that's saying that 4 months from the DLO being accepted, the window for work proposals to be accepted or apply against it closes. And that's, again, separate from the delivery timeline. And then this also defines the overall DLO cap as 2 million. If we do the 2 million budget cap for this overall objective divided by the available slots, that's roughly, I think, like 112,000 per team that could be made available. But again, if a team wants to come in and say, we need, $500,000 for startup, the DAO could potentially provide that. That would then restrict the budget for other teams to apply, potentially triggering another DLO to be created to create more funding if it's all used up. But it goes back to that concept of, do we want a couple teams working on a project? Do we want one team working on a project. Maybe we're flexible, so we'll define it in a couple different ways and see what the ecosystem produces in terms of options that are available to us. If we hop over to work proposals on the next slide, an example then, if the work proposal is approved, would basically be saying, here's our bio, here's some examples to look at. The project plan is more of like a abstraction of how the team will operate to deliver the milestones. Again, very flexible and up to the author to define. The one here talks about using waterfall methodology, order of milestone delivery, just giving some lightweight insight into how the team will work. If there's more transparency required by the DAO up front, that should be defined in the DLO. If there's less, then this makes it a competition point for the workforce teams to showcase their skills to the DAO. And then in the milestone overview, it's a simple confirmation that the deliverable and publishing requirements are acknowledged and will be facilitated. If there's any issues or bespoke negotiations that want to be had, this would be an opportunity to do that. And then there's also a section to call out any challenges that may pop up. Again, the thinking here being an arbitration really needs to be defined, I think, a lot for this too. That's another like shortcoming of this. But if you look at what we have today, there isn't a ton in place, so wasn't too concerned with that. But we would need to define some way to say they didn't produce this deliverable up to quality. We're not going to pay, or what happens in that scenario. And then the budget breakdown is similar to them at 40, which basically says, here's our funding. If they wanted to break it down outside of just like project funding and into the different categories, this would be the opportunity for the workforce to volunteer that information, or the DLO could require it. And then again, the budget implementation logic and potential distribution schedule. The thinking there being maybe a team says, only give us 20% up front and then give us 80% on acceptance to get their foot in the door, to prove their worth. It reduces the risk to the DAO and governance to take a chance on an unknown team, but then also control those funds a little bit more. So yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. About the end of the finished material that I've prepared, but if we want to hop to one more slide, this hopefully paints the illustrative example of DLOs being stacked and shown of available work, what teams are working on that work, how the budgeting is associated to it, when we can potentially expect the different deliverables for that work, and just unlock, I think, some of the insights that make governance fun again. So
this is really cool stuff, Retro, and we appreciate you putting together so many slides to help explain it. I might start with just like a comprehension question, right? Maybe open up discussion and get us discussing the proposal a little more. Could someone who's not retro tell us what a DLO is, just in their own words? Need a hard requirement, but just a short, simple explanation. What is a DLO? Anyone feel like they can take a stab at it?
Were you asking the crowd, or you asking retro?
Anyone but
crowd?
retro.
Oh, the DAO level objective? Is that what you're asking? I don't.
Yeah, in your own words. Like, let's say.
Sure.
You're talking to a buddy after the GNR. They're like, "What the hell did you guys just talk about for an hour and a half, man?" What are you gonna say?
So the way I understand it is, these are conceptual frameworks of objectives that the DAO, MakerDAO, will follow based on the scope frameworks. And I guess like the thing that I'm having a little bit in that, because that was a lot, and that's great work there, retro, that you did. But I guess how do you avoid some of these, I guess, how do you avoid a sub DAO or sub DAOs of the future, like becoming, proposing the same DLOs, right, over time, where it just becomes stale? It's kind of a canonical approach. Is there room there? I might have missed it too, so I apologize for that, where in 10 years, and as the innovation of this technology improves or changes, is there room for the DLOs to change, to pivot?
Yeah, definitely. So similar to how you see MIP 40s evolve as objectives are accomplished from the prior year, and there's a different trajectory moving forward. The MIP 40 though is being proposed by a team that had it last year to renew their budgeting. This again flips the script, so it's work based. So as work gets accomplished, the opportunity for that DLO to be resubmitted isn't available. If there's more of a routine function, that would be different. But again, a lot of that refinement, I think, will come in the months of using it. Today, it's really just taking what we have, putting it in a little bit better structure, and allowing those improvements to happen, I think, in a more consistent manner than the MIPS are structured today.
Right on. I see a hand from Kianga, one of our recognized delegates. If you want to take it away, Kianga.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. That was really great. I just love this. I'm kind of thinking about it at a very conceptual level. So, and I may not be as bogged down with some of the legacy terms of the end game that's maybe helping me right now. But I put in the chat about it feeling like maybe Ford Motor Company in 1912. And what I meant by that was, I'm seeing like just a shift conceptually and structurally away from, defining what we do and who we are and how we operate in a kind of very subjective way. And this structure is beginning to transform the organization into kind of the way I imagined, Ford was creating this assembly line concept of how to build a car that sort of perfects the end product. And so I feel this is a mechanism that's attempting to take some subjectivity out of what we do, provide something that's more autonomous, even in just how we're organized, how we think about what MakerDAO is doing. It's not immutable, right? That's going to come at the constitutional level, but it's this very dynamic and fluid mechanism that allows a consensus to form, not around a particular person or particular team or an abstract mandate that then we struggle with, like how it's implemented, but it's turning the whole dynamics of the organization inside out and saying, all right, let's go from the abstract down to the particular. Like, what do we need to accomplish at the end of the day? And then breaking that down into parts. But it's still quite open because I think anyone can propose a DLO, right? It still has to get approved. But that's how I'm seeing the DAO level objective, being very responsive, and in a way that can outlive all of us and outgrow all of us and survive. And as we evolve into not even, needing to be personally identified in order to work for the project, this is the beginning of that. And I really also think that the separation conceptually of like the work from producing the work is very powerful, and that some things do make sense to have maybe multiple teams attacking it and doing it at the same time, and then other things need to have more focused effort and leadership and maybe more exclusive domain. And so I see this as being really, really impressive.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the feedback. Think a lot of the intention put into this are the high points that you're hitting on. And like I said, we're just to highlight again, we're introducing this as an option for both governance and teams to use, so we can evolve this to what it can be and needs to be for the DAO as quick as possible, and then start tightening down some of the structures. Because you're absolutely right. As Endgame accomplishes its goal of ossifying the system, what are CVCs going to be talking about in their quarterly meetings? I definitely see a pivot from framework improvements to operations happening more on the like 10-year horizon, to like Frank's point. But how do we get there? What tools do we need? And ultimately, what improvements can be made in the short term to help navigate, the transition as well. So, appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, I know. One thing that got me kind of excited about thinking about these was just in game, we have this very clear kind of division of work, right? Where the scopes are saying, here's what needs to be done. And, the sub DAOs ecosystem actors are saying, oh, okay, that's something we can do. And then that's kind of how it's coming together, which is very different from today's DAO, where we basically package a team to say, hey, here's all the stuff our team wants to work on. We're a really qualified team. Like, give us some money, take a chance on us. Let's see what we can produce for the DAO. I very much see DLOs as kind of that, like, bringing that division of endgame to pregame, right? Where now we have the actual objectives that we're defining, saying, hey, here's what we need, and here's how it has to be scoped out, versus the actual people willing to take a piece of that. So yeah, that was one thing that excited me, is I could very much see this as aiding the transition of like, okay, we're starting to separate the work a little bit, getting a little bit closer to that endgame paradigm. We do have some good questions from chat, so I might throw some of those at you, Retro. Lid is noticing that says, is this at all different from conventional requests for proposal processes? I wonder why we don't use the term RFP.
Yeah, half kidding when I responded by saying it's for more acronyms. But I would say Nadia's hitting it a little bit closer on the head. RFPs are, really just that like sole funding mechanism, workforce coordination, not including a lot of the strategy. And we wanted this to be a little bit more inclusive, to be this tool that the DAO can use for both internal management as well as external management. So if that branding helps sell the name at all, that was some of the intent. But no, I would say it's very similar to an RFP process from the traditional world, just trying to adapt it for our decentralized landscape.
All right, cool. So we talked about one side of this framework, right? So someone besides Retro, do you think you could tell us what the other side is, the actual work and project-based side of the proposal? Do you think we could get a description of that in your own words, and how it differs from the DLO? It's like the clear distinction, at least in my head, is like the DLO is what the work is going to be, and the workforce proposal is like who's going to do it, right? So it's a very clear division of like, one is the DAO saying, in the abstract, this is the work we want to have done, whereas the other is saying, hey, we read your proposal, we see it, and here's how the work we want to do fulfills it. So kind of like a call and response, much like the RFPs people are seeing. Anyone else have a different understanding, or Retro, do you want to correct some misconceptions I might have introduced there?
No, I think your summary is correct. I would also open up the floor for any feedback, both from the workforce or the delegate governance perspective, any fears or concerns that we could address in the coming days before RFC. Also wanted to give a quick shout out to a ton of people that have provided feedback, and apologize for not being super on top of incorporating that. That's an exercise that I have planned for this weekend. But yeah, just thank you to the community for all the attention this has been getting. But yeah, any from the contributor perspective or facilitator perspective, seems like more overhead. Do you see the advantages? Governance, like, is this a tool that you guys will actually use? Any sort of that feedback would also be very valuable in the next couple days.
As we mentioned at the top of the call, Retro has till Wednesday to submit some edits if he wants this to be in the March cycle. So yeah, that would be particularly helpful. Seeing it and from David, if you want to take it away.
Who's the main party that actually submits the DLOs?
So right now it's permissionless. So potentially a core unit or somebody in the workforce could propose a DLO and then propose a work proposal to have the work assigned to them. I would say the intent's a little bit higher level than that. So it'd be more of getting the delegates in consensus to use this as a tool to lead the DAO. But I don't I do estimate or forecast potentially like individual contributors that are struggling to navigate endgame coming up and saying like, hey, I do this one task very well. I'd love some funding for it. This is what I deliver. It really unlocks the decentralized aspect then of getting some individuals in to the DAO. That again introduces more overhead. So it's this balancing act of building the operational infrastructure to support the volume we're seeing. But again, from my current estimates, it's more of replacing the current workload with something similar and maybe even a little bit more lightweight based on how it's structured, and then moving on to the iterative improvements from there.
Good stuff happening in chat here, Retro. I'm going to go a little out of order though, and first asked if we discussed a suggested cap of DLOs. I know you threw out a number of, like, say, 2 million. Did you want to talk about that or how it could be changed?
Yeah, so that was just specifically for that DLO. So I would say the intent behind budget caps right now is to basically help us march down that path of the question that was asked back in August, which is how much are we investing in the protocol and the product, and how much are we investing in the DAO and the management of the product. DLOs could be analyzed and reported on by the team if potentially there's a DLO that'll fund that activity, to then say, there's 10 active DLOs. The total cap of all the DLOs is 40 million. It's our current run rate. If we introduce these next ones in RFC, that could bump it up to 50. Or, hey, we do need to reduce the budget. What work functions now are we looking to cut, and how can we realign the teams to create value if that is a concern, so on and so forth. So overall, I don't think I have a suggested one, but again, it's creating that semi-binding tool almost. It's not 100% binding in terms of like being fixed for the year, but it's just creating that platform then to say, oh, outside of core unit budgets, which has a lot of padding and contingency buffers and returns, this is a way to start honing in on a budget for the strategy, and then we can see how that is implemented through operations and delivery against the objectives.
It's like I might have misinterpreted the question a little bit as well, Retro. I added a dollar figure in there where Tim was more directly wondering, like, just in terms of the objectives, like, is the DAO going to be able to add unlimited DLOs, or is there some sort of way to keep that from getting too bloated?
I think it's kind of like the board of directors at Google. They have a big budget. They can fund some moonshots. They can probably get more creative by going into debt. So they could have, quote unquote, an unlimited budget. But for us, I would see it more as a discipline of saying, what do we want to get done? How much are we already committing to? How can some of those levers be moved? If that makes sense. Yeah, no, I take it back. You're right, Tim. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know about
that. Caught me.
Yeah, it was just a suggestion. Maybe, it's exciting to use new frameworks, especially ones that make things so explicit. But the worry is just, okay, cool. DLOs are a tool. Now there's 50 of them, which is just the same problem in a different framework. So maybe it's just like a cultural standard that we are a little bit more clear when we're evaluating these, to say that we really want the first few of these to be setting the example, so that when they are utilized as this tool, they're serving their purpose.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think careful approach is definitely required. And if we look at the opportunities that are coming up, mainly being that core Unity ecosystem actor transition, we're working with some teams that we already established some trust with. We can, I think, be a little bit more lightweight on some of the expectations and start playing, experimenting with the framework, and then to your point, start adding in more of the rigid structures that mimic the operational maturity Maker wants to operate with permanently or long term, or default towards more often than not.
And forgive me, Rich, I'm forgetting, do deals have like a default ending date? Like, I know they could set each one can have their own different periods, but is there a default, like a DLOs can only last 1 year or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I I'm sandboxing the idea of like the expiries, and right now, like, they all must have an expiration, and I'd say it's more on the other end of like how long could that expiration be. So instead of like having a default of just like a year arbitrarily, like how dynamic is the work within the DAO? And I would say it's more yeah, probably picking a year. I think authors will default to a shorter time frame because that, in theory, would spur action sooner. But yeah, my focus is more on the long term right now than the short term in terms of like the expiry specifically.
Awesome, makes sense. Got a cool question here from Frank, who's wondering what your inspiration for the construction of the DLO model was. Did you use any real world case studies, authors, frameworks? I guess kind of where did it come from, and why now?
It combination of what's been observed in the DAO and some of the traditional like board of director tools maybe that would be available. But yeah, it's lipstick on a pig. It's RFPs, you know. There's a lot to learn from the traditional world, but I think the real value of this is trying to tap into more of the software architecture advantages that are available, and design it closer to a platform. So it's kind of taking some lessons learned from software and like government RFPs, basically.
Very cool. All right, there are several good questions that have been ticking by, so I'm gonna try to get to as many as we can here. One in particular is asking the delegates, kind of if they're interested in DLOs, like delegates, do any of you see you potentially using this framework to request funds during transition? Obviously, this can apply to any number of groups, but the chat was kind of speculating about maybe using funds to spin up a DVC, for instance, which is those delegated vote committees where people are essentially setting strategy for the DAO. So delegates, any of you kind of looking at this model and going, oh man, I've got something I want to get in?
Yeah, actually, I didn't think about that. Spinning up another DVC or CVC. Not sure what's the right acronym anymore. Yeah, I wrote back there on the chat that I was under the impression that a delegate's favorite or chosen CVC or DVC would be the one that would put together a DLO, not an individual platform. But I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the endgame constitution, or that's going to be in the constitution. I'm not sure. But I would think that it would be a decentralized voter committee or a constitution voter committee that would create the DLO, right? So it would be a team effort by recognized delegates. But maybe I'm wrong, and a recognized delegate platform could put together a DLO. Yeah, I'm not sure how other delegates here are viewing this.
I guess I might just cut in there and say that, like, obviously in the fully fledged in-game plan, right, like a delegate is playing a very separate role from a DVC. So while I agree with your interpretation, right, that once in games in full swing, like this would be much more appropriate for like a DVC than a delegate. But right now, it's the delegate role is kind of undefined. A lot of people see delegates as playing both roles, right, both the actual voting and the strategy layer. Obviously, some delegates disagree with that, and some other voters would disagree with that as well. But the point being that it's much less defined. So right now, during this transition period, I think it makes a lot of sense for delegates to be looking at this and then thinking, okay, well, where am I trying to position myself for end game? Is this something I can use to spin out to a new field or what have you? Like, obviously, if you want to be a delegate, then you're probably not looking to spin up a DVC since you can't be both. But like I guess there's a lot of moving parts there. You're still people figuring out where they're going to go and roles that haven't been defined yet. So I know, like, when I'm looking at this and I'm thinking of my own life and Gov Alpha, right? Like, first thing that comes to mind is a lot of the GovCom stuff that we're trying to fill in, like video uploading, doing a not best job on that, and they don't have edits, right? We're not inserting music or cuts or any of the kind of branding that had been done before us, because we are just kind of inheriting this duty, right? But if I had a DLO, right, if I could say, hey, the DAO cares about having high quality recorded content, then maybe we get some funding, maybe we spin it off and make sure that calls like this actually are presented in a more engaging way. Yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind for me. I think it really depends on where you are and what you're working on. So yeah, would put out the calls for if there's other delegates that have thought about this, other core unit members. Any kind of thoughts on, if you had a magic wand, what the first DLO you would make is? Reading the chat here talking about, like, would it be for individual delegates, would it be for strategy? And I think that's like kind of the cool part, right? Like, you could just have a DLO that says, hey, transitioning delegates to end game is important, so let's establish XYZ, make sure that this gets done, and if that's done, we'll pay these people for their transition. Likewise, you could do it strategy based, where you say, hey, growth in in-game is really important, so we've got this like really big dovish, I can't remember, it's like opposite of hawkish stance that we want to build. So here's a DLO for all the different ways you can get funding to expand metrics, right? So it really depends on kind of the motivation of the people putting it up for vote and what they want to accomplish. Right. I am noting the time here. We typically try to wrap up within about 15 minutes now. Obviously, we presented a pretty cool MIP set today. Retro's asked for feedback. So if there is more on this subject, I would definitely like to get to it. But also might kind of treat this as the last call for further subjects or inquiries you want to bring up on today's governance and risk call. Might be good to ask you, Retro, if there's any reflections, anything you'd like people to take a look at before Wednesday.
No, appreciate the feedback. Trying to target incorporating all the feedback and a little bit of a rewrite by Monday. We do also want to have know your MIP calls. We'll probably break it up into two, one for the auditor framework and one for the TLOs and work proposals. That most likely will occur after the RFC period, just based on how schedules are looking. But look for something early next week if we try to fit in something before RFC. And as always, available on Discord, forum, should have a way of reaching me, but would be happy to have any one-on-one conversations or potentially look at drafting some DLOs in preparation for hopefully a positive ratification vote next month.
Yeah, that is a fun idea. If this were to pass, we could maybe do a workshop the following month or something about putting together a DLO or something neat like that. We'll see what the DAO thinks, and if they support the proposal, maybe we'll look into that.
Yeah, but overall, appreciate everybody's attention for the past hour. Wasn't sure how much time we'd spend on this, but yeah, just quick thanks.
All right. Looks like people have had enough time to drop any last thoughts or questions. Not seeing any. So I think I'll take us to our wind down. Really great call today, folks. Thanks for so much participation on this new idea from Retro. Obviously, we'll have more to discuss. Look forward to those Know Your BIP calls coming up on them. One last reminder that if you have proposals in RFC you're looking to submit for the February cycle, please do make sure you get those edits in by end of day on Wednesday so they can be eligible. Likewise, if you have something you would like to see voted on in the March cycle, so not the upcoming cycle, but the one after that, it does need to be an RFC by February 8th, which is a week from Wednesday. So that's what's going on the governance end. Take a look, as always, at the Maker forums and our Discord if you want to get in touch. We'll be back same time, same place next week, and let you know what else has happened since. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Hope you have a good one.